Hey everyone, I wanted to take the time today to help simplify the diabetes iron overload connection and break it down into kind of an elevator pitch type of thing that will make it a little bit more palatable for you to explain it to yourself and to share with others so that you can kind of start a conversation around it. So it all is based on this idea that through the past several generations, 3, 4, 5 maybe, we as a society have altered with the source and content of our food to the point where we are no longer getting nutrients, vitamins, minerals, carbs, fats, proteins in a balanced way. So this comes from so many different fronts. Life stresses, economic circumstances, famine, wars, the enrichment and fortification of food. It is accumulated over so many generations. In what I have been talking about, really reference back to the 20s and 30s, 1920s, 1930s, when food started to be enriched. Now, this is when foods really started to be circulated globally. And when food started to be circulated globally, they started adding a lot of extra things, stabilizers, preservatives. They started to process it more, to take things out of it that would make it more prone to spoiling. They added more things into it to increase or, trying to increase its health benefits. Now, one thing that I focus on the most for myself is the enrichment of grains. So flour, corn products, anything involving grains, commercial grains. So when we started enriching flour, by processing it and bleaching it, we took parts of the wheat out that were rich in fat-soluble vitamins, which made it more prone to mold because of the fat in it. And we took away its iron, we took away its B vitamins, which were all part of the wheat germ and the wheat bran on the outer parts of the wheat. Now, we started to realize that we were doing this because in the 20s and 30s, we were in between two world wars. Nations were rationing, people and populations were experiencing famines, and there were a lot of cases of malnourishment, rickets disease, all different kinds of things. So public governments and people responsible for administering policies started to look into enriching products. And when they did that, they added in things that they thought were being taken out when they were processing, and that's partially true. So for enriched wheat flour, what is mostly added, and you can look at any nutritional label here, it talks about reduced iron as well as a series of B vitamins, and those are two of the biggest ones being taken out of the wheat when it's being processed. Now, what was also going on in this state is that the farming of animals and the farming of vegetables were all being similarly modified to account for the global and at least national means of production, right? So now there's fewer and fewer local farms responsible for feeding their communities. Now you have these huge commercial productions responsible for feeding whole countries, whole regions. And they did this by modifying soils for vegetables. They did this by modifying food sources for the animals that would be circulated. So you look at the food being fed to, pigs, cows, chickens, a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids These are byproducts from other commercial endeavors, you know, extra oils, vegetable oil, hydrogenated vegetable oils. These are all very stable, very abundant, very cheap to produce. And when you feed them to animals, they make them very fat. Fatter animal, heavier animal, it makes it more profitable when they sell. The thing is, when you go to eat that animal, you are eating what it ate. And what it ate was extremely pro-inflammatory and detrimental to any sort of balance in regards to macronutrients and micronutrients. Same goes for soil, right? You have these huge operations now responsible for keeping plants healthy for longer and more stable because they need to travel further to reach where they're going. Things like glyphosate, NPK fertilizers, right? NPK stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are all important minerals in the body, but it skewed everything else in the soil to a point where it kind of depleted the nutrients away from the plants themselves. So you start feeding this to the population over many generations, and this is a global affair. The people eating these affected plants and animals now are accumulating these imbalances. When this happens, it starts to manifest in different ways in the body. Now, when it comes to iron and diabetes, iron, which is added, reduced iron is added to all commercial cereal products, commercial grains, baked goods, breads, pasta, you know, anything you can think of that has flour in it, it's probably got reduced iron added to it. Now, when they enriched and fortified all of these commercial grains, they did not account for the full spectrum of nutrients that was taken out initially. So with those fat-soluble vitamins, things like vitamin K, things like vitamin E, minerals like copper and magnesium, right? These are all very important in making sure that the ones that they did add in, like iron, were properly balanced when they were assimilated into the body. Now, fast forward a couple generations, right? People are eating this imbalanced food. So if you spend your whole life, or if your grandfather and your father spent their entire lives eating this reduced iron without getting appropriate copper, magnesium, or any of the fat-soluble vitamins, they're going to get to a point where they become iron overloaded. Now, there is a clinical term for iron overload, that's hemochromatosis, right? There are some genetic factors that make you more prone to hemochromatosis, but there is such a thing as secondary iron overload too, which is initiated by food intake and environmental factors. So we as a nation start to become iron overloaded. Now, how does iron overload lead to diabetes? Iron is an important mineral in our body because it is extremely reactive, and it is used as a catalyst by our mitochondria in our cells to help cellular respiration turn glucose into usable energy for the body. It's very important, right? That's why it's in plants. That's why it's in the food that we eat. So that's a little bit of iron is a good thing, right? In a balanced state, iron is extremely necessary for life, but now we've become iron overloaded. Now, the liver is the organ that is managing our iron load. The liver is where blood is filtered and recycled, right? Because that's where most of our iron is. It's in our blood cells, hemoglobin, carrying oxygen to be deposited into cells to be used for cellular respiration. So blood's being filtered through the liver. Iron is being offloaded. It's being sent where it needs to. It's going to the bones so that it can help make bones. It goes to the cells so it can help create energy. But it's all kind of based out of the liver. And when the liver, which has storage sites for iron, becomes overloaded, it is unable to retain all of this iron. Now, like I mentioned, iron is incredibly reactive. And so when it reaches a critical threshold in the liver, it starts to be deposited into surrounding organs, things like the gallbladder, things like the pancreas, things like the kidneys, the digestive system, the reproductive organs. The liver is an incredibly well-connected organ. It has digestive functions, it has endocrine functions, it releases hormones, and it has excretory functions, you know, through the kidneys and through the small intestine. So it has ties to so many parts of our bodily systems, right? So aside from the nervous system and the brain and the cardiovascular system, I would say that there's no more well-connected organ to every other organ than the liver. So when the liver gets iron overloaded and is not able to effectively chaperone and shield the reactive potential of iron, it starts to share it with other organs. Now, these organs are not well equipped to handle the extremely reactive iron. So they do not have the chaperone proteins, the ferritin, the transferrin, the ferroportin, the hepcidin, that are required to make sure that the iron is not being dangerous and is only reactive in systems and processes where it's supposed to be. So now you've got this kind of very volatile mineral in places where it's not supposed to be. Now, for diabetics, we're extremely concerned with the beta cells, right? I'm someone with type 1 diabetes. I've been sold the idea that my beta cells have been depleted, killed off by inflammation, and now I'm insulin dependent. So why are the beta cells preferentially targeted by this iron? Well, iron, like I mentioned before, has an incredibly important part in cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is converting glucose into ATP for our body to use it in our bodily processes. Now, how is that glucose getting into the cell to be catalyzed by iron into energy? Insulin. Beta cells release insulin so that the food that we eat can be taken to the cells so that iron can effectively catalyze, you know, metabolic reactions. So there is a direct link between beta cells, insulin production, and iron use. So because of that relationship, beta cells have a particular protein that make it very sensitive to iron load. Because even in a healthy system, as a means of protection, our body, our beta cells know that it doesn't want to give insulin to a cell that doesn't have enough iron, right? Because if you're putting glucose in a cell and there isn't any iron there to catalyze a reaction to create energy, it's not able to do its job. So there's an important discussion being held between iron levels and insulin release to allow for our body to effectively make energy. So unlike all of the other tissues or all of the other cell types in the pancreas, so there's alpha cells, beta cells, gamma cells, delta cells. Why are the beta cells preferentially targeted? That's because beta cells have a protein responsible for the retention and release of iron called hepcidin. It is a iron-related protein that no other cell in the pancreas has. So, in this state of iron excess, which has already initiated low-grade inflammation in the liver itself, is now being retained and redirected into the beta cells, where they are held because there's no place else to put the extra iron. Okay, but now we have iron in some place that does not have the capabilities to keep it safe, right? So now you have this iron locked in a cell with no means of effectively neutralizing it. So what happens? An immune reaction, right? So now all of this iron is becoming reactive within the beta cells, causing tons of oxidative stress, leading to inflammatory cascades. And our immune system acts on these things happening in the beta cells. That's kind of the nature, the autoimmune nature. We look at it as our immune system attacking the cell, but really it's not the immune system's fault. It's doing its job. The iron in the cell is causing all of this crazy oxidative stress. The immune system chronically just kind of like trying to clean up the mess. Eventually the beta cells die off. That's how diabetes is forming. Okay, so when it comes to, you know, explaining this to somebody, or if someone comes to you and is like, you know, I heard about like iron overload and diabetes, how does that even work? Mineral imbalances over a long period of time, specifically relating to too much iron and not enough of anything else that regulates the deposition of that iron, causes iron to become overloaded in the liver, shared with the pancreas. Beta cells, because of their unique relationship with iron and glucose metabolism, have proteins that make it more susceptible to the negative effects of iron overload. Beta cells take on this extra iron. The iron eats the beta cell from the inside out. The immune system tries to clean things up. The beta cells eventually die off. Insulin is no longer able to be secreted.